We're live. I gotta hold on. Check my hair.
Hey, friends. Do us a favor. If you are actually watching live, let us know if you can hear us in the comments. Just to avoid any tech difficulties, yay or nay, you can hear us talking and you can see us. And that will help us a whole lot. So, well, hopefully somebody is doing that. I want to welcome you to the Child of the Redwoods live. This is episode 4 that we've done so far.
That's
so
right.
quite an accomplishment. Yay.
Oh,
Made
high
it through
five. High five. Yeah.
4 episodes already. We are 2 former public school teachers who chose to homeschool our own kids, and we are here to share with you our views on education. We're going to talk about parenting, Montessori. We'll talk about real life, what real life looks like. Thank you so much, Aaron. Hi. So glad you're here. And we'll talk about love because that's what Montessori is all about. It's all about love.
That's right.
I am Aubrey Hargis, and I'm here with...
I'm David. Yeah. We're so glad to have you here, either live. If you joined us live, welcome. If you're listening to this later, welcome. Come over to the live next time. We broadcast every other Thursday. Today's a special Wednesday broadcast. But we're really happy to have you here. You know, our goal with this conversation is to kind of help you decide what kind of an education you want to give your own children. And whether you're homeschool full-time or not, we believe that education is a journey you take with your children, and the opportunities start over every day. So whether you're homeschooling part-time, not at all, or whatever else, being a really informed and involved parent and caregiver with that educational process is exactly what we are hoping to sort of encourage and support.
Yeah.
We have a bit of a heavy topic today. But as some of you know, in our family, we've had a few family members have passed. And I think more broadly with the situation in Ukraine, with COVID, the last couple of years have been very, very intense. And so I think it's useful for us to talk about this, and that is the end of life, how to talk about death compassionately. What does Montessori teach us? What do we expect from the children at the different planes of development and readiness? And how do we kind of help navigate through that? You know, especially here, I was thinking about this particularly because we are coming into a holiday for many, many people around the world, and many in our audience. It's Easter. It's a very special time. And even if you aren't religious, if you don't celebrate it as a religious holiday, that it's often still a family event, and you may be coming together as a family, and there may be an empty table, a place setting, somebody who's not there this year, or maybe the first time you've been able to come back together since COVID, and there's emptiness for just the talk of it, or people wanting to process and talk about it. So I think it's timely.
And spring itself,
of course,
we're talking about. We just witnessed the death of all of the leaves falling off, and now there is new growth and new life, and so that will kind of be part of our conversation as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But first, a few very quick updates.
Okay. So, what's going on right now at Child of the Redwoods? David and I are spending a lot of time collaborating. We just started this course of Homeschool the Redwoods Primary not too long ago. We're about 4 or 5 weeks in now. So kind of midway through the course. If that course is something that's interesting to you, you can go ahead and join now, but I won't be teaching live until the fall. So what we're doing in there right now is actually really, really fun. We've been focusing on language for the last 2 weeks. I'm about to go live tomorrow morning to talk like a little more deeply about language, but in Montessori, to give you some little rabbit holes to kind of go down, if Montessori is new to you, you might go and just check out sandpaper letters.
Yep.
Go Google that. It's an amazing material that Maria Montessori herself developed for children, and the movable alphabet, which is essential. I think it's just like, it is just one of the best materials, ways to teach reading and writing for children. It's just incredible. So if you don't have either of those at home, but you want to use the Montessori approach with your children, those are 2 materials that you might want to look into.
You can DIY those. You can buy less expensive versions because they become so popular and mainstream. So go out there and get yourself a set and start to use them. It's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, Sabina. So glad you could be here too.
Hello.
So I'm also teaching an elementary course right now. We just We just initiated the challenges for the current month of April, which is math.
Yep.
So that's kind of fun that's going on there. The elementary course is a lot longer, so we take a year and kind of more slowly walk our way through the curriculum because it
There's
does
a
get
lot.
very intense.
Yep.
Maria Montessori actually, I'm pretty much sure she really literally said we should give children the universe in the elementary ages. And
Totally
she meant
right.
that pretty literally, that we should just give them a little bit of every single subject that there is out there. So that's quite a lot to take in. So that's why the course is a bit longer. But they're both really fun ages to teach. Yeah.
I love that lower L curriculum.
Mm.
My training is in secondary. So, and I taught high school mostly when I was in the public school system as a school teacher, and then adults, then got into distance learning and e-learning and so forth. And I've worked mostly with adults since then. So it was a newer thing for me to kind of really deeply explore the lower elementary curriculum when we were writing it over the last few years. Want me to get closer? Hello.
A little bit.
It was really fun. But what I really, you talk about an aha moment. What I love about the lower elementary curriculum is the way that it really is about giving the universe to the child. If you're not familiar, many of us are less familiar with the lower elementary curriculum than we are with the primary. We have a much more experience with daycare or early childhood programs, things like that. Yeah. And there are fewer children who go on and take what we would say first, second, third grade here in the U.S. With lower elementary. And so it may be not familiar, but what I'm going to tell you is that it is beautiful. It really is an amazing curriculum. She really lays out what we defined as 8 subject areas that you focus on. And really, to my mind, it's like a spiral. Basically, you're going to teach these 8 core concepts around these subject areas like grammar and math. And for the rest of your life as a human being, you're just going to get deeper and deeper in those things. So it's like once you know those 8 areas, you've sort of acquired the essential things about humankind that we think a well-rounded, educated, literate person would want to know. They would know something about art. They would know something about literature. They would know something about physical science and life science. And then the rest of our life, our journey is just deeper and deeper and deeper. So for somebody like me, my focus was on education. As I got deeper and deeper and I went higher and higher in education, I just tended to focus more on that humankind element. And for others, they're going to focus on math or they're going to focus on something else. But that's what that whole journey is. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so if it feels overwhelming to say the whole universe, it can be, but trust us, it's doable.
It is. And so what we did, we spent a lot of time talking about this and developing years developing this idea. What we decided to do is we wanted to make Montessori a little more practical. So we felt like once people really got a good understanding of the foundation of the method itself, the philosophy, and they really understood what we were trying to do in Montessori, we wanted to give more helpful resources to help parents implement it practically. So that's what we do in Constellation. And in this month, we are studying mud.
Which just in time for April. For some of us, it's muddy. Not here in this part of California, but still, we all love mud at some point in our life.
You can always create mud.
Yeah. So one of the activities we've done is how to use different materials. And there's so it's a matching activity. You say like what's made out of stone or what kind of a boat is made out of wood. What makes this so great is for little ones. There's just a lot of
the control
of error on the back. Sorry about that. Control of error on the back to help out the teacher there, the parent. But what's wonderful about this is that if you're got a little one, it can just really about introducing the different ways that people live, to give diversity of thought and help them sort of understand how we use the natural world. For older kids, for those lower elementary kids, this is one of the fundamental needs of humans as defined by Montessori. It's one of the 15 is shelter. And so it fits perfectly in there. And so there's also art in there and there's also science, all sorts of stuff. Other activities this month. We have some cool word problems for older ones. We have I'm very proud of our illustration for
David does all these designs himself.
Parts of a worm. So that's fun. And again, these are great for little ones. We have lessons. We have instructions to help you do it for like a 3-year-old. And if you've got an older kid, let's say you've got an 8 or an 8-year-old or so, we can have its directions on how to make it work for them as well. Because again, going back to that idea of the lower elementary curriculum and all of the curriculum, it's like a spiral. So there's a foundation in those 8 core areas, and we move on up, 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 up. And so that's why you can do something for a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old.
Yeah, for real. Anyway, it's really fun. I'm really thrilled. Something that I feel like makes our work different from some of the other work that's out there is we have well, all three of us are trained teachers, working on these curriculum materials. And I'm certified in lower elementary, and that's like my official background. But we also have Carrie, who is certified through AMI in primary. And all three of us kind of work together in a lot of ways to develop these materials. And we're actually really, really picky about it. So many times David is like groaning because, he, for example, with the parts of the earthworm, like we're passing this stuff back and forth, and we print it out, and I look at it, I'm like, no, this still isn't right. Like, can you redo the design? And he's like, I don't want to redo the design. Like, it takes
some of these parts of an earthworm are really, really little.
Yeah.
So we went through a lot of design iterations. Like, how do you make it so that a child see realistically that it is very, very tiny, but not so tiny that it's like abstract to them,
and also keep it really super true to what the Montessori materials are designed to do.
That's right.
So that's the tricky part. Like, I feel like anybody can just whip up a set of parts cards, and if you want to do that, I encourage you to go do it, because anybody really can whip up a set of parts cards. You could just do it with a pen and like a pencil and a piece of paper. You can whip up a set, draw your own worm.
It's totally fine.
But something that's really fun about Montessori is the attention to detail and the exactness. And Maria Montessori herself was super specific about this point. Like, she really believed that if we're going to take the trouble to design materials for children, we should be as exact as we possibly can about it. And so that's something I find challenging and fun about the creation of these materials.
Totally.
Is going back and forth about, like, is this true to the method? Does this really, what kind of control of error are we actually looking for here? Because sometimes it's easy to find, and sometimes it's not so clear.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it goes to that idea of the spiraling that we see, in the entirety of the Montessori learning experience, where you think the child at a certain age, we want them to know there's a worm, where does it fit taxonomically? Where do they find, what is their habitats? And as they go further and further, we want them to identify parts and then subparts as they get deeper and deeper. But it's still biology or life science. It's still rooted in there. It's the biology or life science they're studying at 2. Is the biology or life science they'll be studying at 22 or 42, just at a greater and greater detail. That's why Montessori is so incredibly powerful.
So, yay. So what we'd like to bring us into right now is Dave and I are going to share some updates from our own actual homeschooling experience with our kids. Now, we are well aware that our kids are probably older than yours. We've been homeschooling for quite a while. So we have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old at this point. They're actually 11 and a half and 14 and a half, because everybody knows those half years can make a big difference. Yeah, they really can. So, but some of the things that we are dealing with we are noticing are still iterations of the same kind of things that we were teaching them when they were little. And so we're just going to talk about some of the things that's going on in our family, personal life right now. So one of the things that I've been doing recently is David's been doing a lot more teaching, and I've been doing a lot more reading of this awesome book. The Child is the Teacher. And so if you were to peek into our household over the last couple days, you would have seen me on the couch, or the last couple weeks, really. You would have seen me on the couch reading this book. Now, this book probably should not take you 2 weeks to read, but I loved it, first of all. So, I know we did that discussion a little while back about the article, The Miseducation of Maria Montessori, that was posted in the New Yorker. And David and I were not really thrilled with the way the author presented Maria and her work. And we kind of hashed through about, like, why, what was it about it? I think the episode is called Is Montessori Elitist? So if you're interested in that topic, you can go back to the replay on that.
That's also a podcast if you want to listen.
Yeah, it's also on the podcast too, because all of these will be recorded on the podcast as well. So, but this is the book that article was written about. The Child is the Teacher. It's by a journalist named Christina De Stefano. And I have to say that I don't know what reading this book would be like in Italian, but I know that the English translation is fantastic. I love the way it's written. I love how Maria's life just really comes to life. It's friends. This is like, imagine like the best of Grey's Anatomy, but in a book. It's got romance. It's got grief and trauma. It's so dramatic, and it was so enjoyable to read. So if you're picking this and you're like, I don't want to read a boring biography, this is not a boring biography. This is like so exciting. And I am not affiliated with the author at all. I actually don't know her. I was kind of wish I knew her.
Yeah.
Because I'm so enthralled with her book. So here it is, free promotion for this book. We are probably going to be talking a lot more about this book.
Yeah, it's my turn to read. We just bought the one copy, so
I know,
passing it over. But I think we're going to do a reading series
I've
on
given
it.
so many spoilers.
I
keep popping up. I'm like, I have to tell you this thing that I just read. And it's, for me, like, I've read other biographies, so it's not like there's just a ton in here that I didn't already know. It's that the way it's written. And so I read it so slowly because I wanted to look up and see if there was anything else to Google about all of these different people and events that she mentioned. So, every other chapter, I would pause and I would go and Google the person that she was writing about, see if I could find a picture of their face, like see what they actually looked like.
Yeah.
And what I would love to do probably is like gather all of that stuff and see if I can I had this vision. After I finished the book, I was like, you know what I'll do? I will make a mural. Like I'm going to get a big board, a poster board, and I'm just going to cut out all these pictures and make this big collage of Maria Montessori's life. And then I'll host a workshop and I'll create this big PowerPoint full of all these photos. And so that's just to say that this is a worthy expenditure. I know it's pricey to buy a hardback book, especially one that's brand new and there's no used copies. But if Montessori is your thing, like, this is something I've really, really been enjoying recently.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation about. We're going to be we haven't solidified it yet, but I think we're going to do a multi-part series where we discuss the book. I know a lot less about Maria Montessori's biography. I'm more familiar with her work than I am about her life. I've learned some spoilers because someone's very, very excited about this, but I don't think this is the kind of thing where the ending can be spoiled. So if this is interesting to you, you'd like to follow along, we'll probably do the first installment in 2 weeks when we reconvene. So if you'd like to read along with us, follow our Instagram for updates on what exactly we're going to be planning out. Pick up the book if you can and get it at a library.
We'll post an impromptu book club.
For
fun. Yeah.
She's a fascinating person.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and there's so much to learn from this book. There's so many things that we can talk about.
Very complicated person.
She's a very complicated person. Yeah. So that's something you would see if you were to peek in. You would see Aubrey on the couch, sitting, reading this book, getting excited, giving David too many spoilers. You'd also see us preparing for the camp out. Do you want to talk about our youngest just went on this big camping adventure.
He did
with his forest school. He's there right now.
That's right. So one of our one of the things that we do as a homeschool family is we have the kids in a forest school program here in the Bay. It's a wonderful program. It's really well known here in the Bay. And it used to be very, very, it was hard to get into. You have to wait on the list and you finally get, because they only have so many slots. And basically every Friday they go, for us, it's a Friday, they go to a park and they spend the whole day in the park and they romp around and they learn survival type skills and how to whittle, how would you start a fire? How would you do this or that? How do you identify different kinds of plants? I know that
it's not just a park though.
It's not like a
deep
playground
in the woods.
Park. Yeah, it's the redwood forest.
No cell phone access.
Yeah.
Like they're like in the woods, totally gone for the whole day.
We're very fortunate.
And we never have cell signal there. It feels like an act of bravery for for me at
And they
least.
love it. They've really thrived in it. It's that social piece. And a lot of parents are worried about
Yeah.
socializing, the socialization part of homeschooling if they choose to homeschool. And it is a worry unless you actively go out. And then it isn't a worry. If you find clubs and activities and friend groups and play groups, they'll get all the socialization that they would need if you engage. And so part of the forest school is about that. And one of the very special events for the forest school is that twice a year they go on a camp out. So our youngest, who is 11, he went in the fall with his brother. His older brother escorted him, but this time he went alone. Alone and with 35 other
I think like 40.
second playing kiddos. They're all he's in a group of 8 to 12 or something like that. So all second playing kids.
Yep.
And his best, his good friends that he's made while they're camping. We don't really know what's happening right now. They're very far away. We live in the northern part of the bay, and they're way south. They're down by Big Sur, which is very far. It's about 3 hours in the woods. There's no cell signal. This is the first time we've ever had our little one. He's not so little, but this first time he's been like that for us. And it's a little stressful, but it's really, really exciting.
It's really exciting, and it's very stressful. I don't know. Probably, I feel like it's more stressful for me than it is for you.
Well, you show your stress differently, for sure.
Maybe. Yeah. So, I don't know. Friends, it just, every stage of independence is hard for us to let go, even when we know that things are good for them. And on this particular trip, I didn't even get to drop him off. A friend offered to go take them with him, and so we dropped him off at a friend's house, and then they took him the rest of the way, several hours away, and I was a nervous wreck.
So not to give too many details, you did wake up in the middle of the night with a lot of anxieties, and I remember very vaguely trying just to, like, if I go back to sleep, will she stop talking? But
I know. No, I woke up.
No, I have to be awake. I need to engage.
I woke up and I said, what if? What if everything? I said, what if he gets a little cut on his finger? What if he's scared to go to sleep at night without us? What
if there's a car wreck?
What if a bear comes?
What if a bear comes?
What if a bear comes?
What if there's some kind of like Jason Voorhees type maniac that attacks? I mean, it's everything from catastrophizing to the biggest to the smallest.
But the thing is, David, that this is, if any parent that puts their child in school at any time,
of course,
this is generally the same kind of thing. Whether they're new little babies, like you have to kind of hold your breath and let them go. And of course, what was really hardest for me that I wanted to talk about was that I had to really not show this fear while my son was preparing to go to camp. And that was really hard.
Totally.
So it was really hard. I got the text from the friend's mom, and I said, hey, I have something to tell you. You've been invited to go with a friend, and we're not going to, we wouldn't drop you off. You would get to go with them. And his eyes got huge. And we had just watched the movie Turning Red, where, he had asked this the night before if we would allow him to go to a concert on his own. And the answer was no.
Yeah.
So, but he was super excited. He was like, oh, you would let me do that? We said, yes, of course we would let you do that. We like the kid's mom, and she's going to be driving, and, you're with a friend, and then you get dropped off in the woods to camp with your camp counselors. And so I really had to keep that positive, excited outlook, and that kind of kept me going too.
Yeah, his excitement is infectious. And, I see you made the note about socialization. I mean, that's what it's really about. So part of it is about the individuation, right? This experience of developing independence that's so critical. And part of it is about letting them find their own path, which is really scary. It's why we have to make sure that we put within our homeschool day, as often as is reasonable and possible, some level of socialization. Having two sons, they are each other's best friends, but it's also important, even if we only had one child, it would be the same situation. They need peers of their own. I mean, that's why that for me, that was the number one reason I wanted the boys to join the forest school program, because for our older, he just needs a bigger group of teens, boys and girls, that he
Yeah.
can be around. He can kind of learn socialization. He can sort of learn the confidence, how to talk to people, and kind of figure out who he is as a person. Same thing goes for our younger one, who's now probably filthy with mud in a tent somewhere,
Mhm.
and we're here like, oh, I hope he's okay, but he's probably having the time of his life, and
No doubt.
hopefully not thinking about it and just focusing on that socialization. It's difficult for us, to let that baby bird fly, but it's so important to find those opportunities and then trust that they're going to be okay into them.
Yeah. Okay. So Sabina and Sherry and Laura. Okay. So yeah, socialization. So we've got a lot of other things to talk about. And we do want to get into death, but a note on that. All homeschoolers that I know have ever met all worry about it. Okay.
Absolutely.
And because we're collectively worried about it, we collectively do something about it. So if you can tap into your own homeschooling community, if you live near anyone else that homeschools, you're probably going to find parents who are doing things to get the kids together. And one of the most common things that parents do is just to have a day at the park, to just play, have a day where the kids can get together. We also very intentionally invite friends over, or go over to friends' houses, and so in homeschooling, and I can't speak from the perspective of a parent who works full time and sends their kids to school.
Yeah, we're
But
very lucky that
what
we
I
could be
can
in the
tell
position where
you,
we have that.
what I can tell you is that in the homeschool life, there's a lot of social interaction going on because for the most part, the parents are kind of demanding it of themselves and each other and making it happen. So, it's not really it's something, just to tell you, it's something everybody worries about, but not really something that I think you need to worry about as much. Like it's legitimate to
Absolutely.
have the fear, but it's not really a legitimate super concern if you're an active homeschooler. And if you don't have a homeschooling community to collaborate with, you're probably going to be using the community that exists around you anyway. The kids that go to school, you're going to be tapping into that part of the community. You're still going to be taking your kids to places where there are other kids where they can make
That's right.
friends.
Are they in a little league
Yeah.
or
There's
karate,
just no
soccer,
end of
tots?
opportunities that you
Yeah.
can give your kids, even if you don't have a fancy forest school to find in your area and then sign your kids up
Yeah.
for. And we didn't send our kids to forest school until just this year,
Yeah.
just because we were choosing to do other things. Our
That's right.
life was full with other things, and they were satisfied.
The
So
the only thing I would add on that is, um, it's important as the parent, you do have a responsibility to support that journey. It can be tempting, especially certain ages of children,
yeah,
can become reluctant. They don't want to get out. They'll fight you on it. They'll throw the tantrum. I don't want to get in the car or whatever. So it's true at teenagehood and it's true at toddlerhood. It just keeps going and going. Don't give in to that. This is where there's a balance between following the child and providing the right environment for the child. So we're going to follow the child in an enriching environment. And that enriching environment needs to include socialization, maybe learning from other people besides yourself over time. If that's important to you, letting them take classes online or in a community center, something like that. If you're able to do that sort of thing, so that they get a diversity of thought and they can kind of be their own person. They can start to test out who they are themselves, and you're going to need to kind of push them a bit to do that. So he was, our youngest was over the moon to go to this camping trip. He's been waiting for it for months. But even if he hadn't, it would have been something that, despite the fact that it's scary, and probably would have been happier in some sense to have let him just like continue to be our little guy here at home. It's important to let him go out. He's got to be able to stretch his wings.
yeah.
You've got to kind of encourage that and not let them sit out.
Agreed. All right, so let's talk about death. So I sent this email recently that talked about my brother's doggy dying, and it was super sad for all of us. We had all fallen in love with this little dog. He was 7 years old at that point. And so my brother writes and says, this terrible thing happened to the dog. He bit a cane toad, or I think a bufo toad, that had been in their yard. Had been a problem in their backyard that they had been trying to make sure the dog was safe from. And it just didn't happen. And so we got word that the dog needed to be euthanized, compassionately. And we were all kind of grieving it. The kids were super sad.
They were.
And my brother has a 4-year-old, and for her entire life, this dog has been there. I'm sad for my brother and his wife as well, because this dog was their first baby before they had a human baby. And we used to joke about that, right? Because we had little kids at the same time that they got this little dog.
Yeah, we were just like, come on and cut to the chase,
it's a dog. I know.
Get it over with. It's fine.
I know. Have a real baby. I know.
That's right.
But this was a very precious doggy to
Beloved,
them.
yeah.
So that was a bit of sadness recently, and I've just been thinking, how is my 4-year-old niece dealing with this? Because the year of 4, that 4-year-old year, is a time when children are much more aware of life and death and just life cycles in general. And that it must be very weird for her to have had this presence in her life the whole time, almost like a furry little brother that is suddenly now gone. So it's a tragedy.
It is.
Yeah.
It affects us in so many ways. It makes me think, when after my father passed away, my parents had two little dogs, and we had, not long after he had passed, we had gone to visit Mom. This is a few months ago, and we were at the house, and one of the dogs, which was Dad's dog, he would sit on the back of his lazy boy. He loved this dog, and this dog loved him. Like, they were bosom buddies. And Dad, wasn't able to spend as much time with the dog toward the end because had cancer, and he was in a chemo ward for a lot of it. And with COVID protocols, he just couldn't visit. So this dog had kind of sensed it, and that dog passed away while we were there. He got sick and he died. And, he was an older dog, so it's not a surprise in a way that an older dog would pass, but it's also not a surprise that it would die of a broken heart, which I think is in essence what happened. He realized his owner was never coming back. So that connection we have with pets, and pets have with us, is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
They are such empathetic creatures. We really can, I think nowadays we're really aware of what pets mean to us, but it wasn't always the way. I was raised kind of to think like dogs are dogs. They sit out in the backyard and they bark, and if they die, they die. That's not really like our culture anymore. Fortunately, I think we're much more compassionate, and I think that's helped us see like the connectivity of pets. And that death, the dog's passing, brought up a huge number of emotions for the rest of the family.
Yeah,
in a way, it was like reliving my father's passing. And the boys were there, and they were kind of going through this, and especially our youngest one. He was really taking it hard.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really quite know how to comport himself. He wanted to make sure that we buried the remains, and he was going to be there, and he wanted to make a memorial, and he wants to build a garden.
He had this very elaborate plan of how to celebrate the life of his dog appropriately. So it was hard.
It was hard. All that's to say that, he was, again, he's not 4, but he's still processing that. And those reminders of passing are everywhere. I'm thinking about, we kind of mentioned it at the top of the discussion, that we're coming into Easter, and a lot of people will, those religious observers, Passover as well, the religious observance, as well as a family together time. We are going to be visiting family, and there's going to be an empty seat, as there will be for a lot of places. And it's another one of those times of a reminder, just like the dog passing is a reminder. It's a reminder of going away. Now, for a little one, that understanding is going to be much different than for, let's say, an 11-year-old.
Yeah, so let's talk developmentally about what happens, how to approach this whole concept of death. So when children are probably under the age of 2, there's not a lot of awareness going on. The child might observe a dead creature out and about, and not really think anything of it, or really have any kind of really noticing of it. But somewhere kind of in between 1.5 and 2.5 and 3, children start to become more curious. And you'll notice your little one finding a dead bug, or maybe becoming kind of obsessed about collecting dead bugs.
Is a little dead wormy or something,
a little
right?
dead worm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Our kids had a lot of experiences with little dead insects in the yard when they were little. And they would always come in with fascination. You look what I found. It's the corpse of a spider, or those were always my favorite, or a roach, or like all kinds of disgusting things that we as adults kind of react adversely to. But as Montessorians, we try really not to. We try to react with the same kind of curiosity that they're showing us. And so I remember that being a challenge when my children were very little, is they would bring me these little dead things, or they would point out dead things, little dead parts of a bird on the ground, or roadkill, or there was a dead squirrel in the playground one time, and it was flat, and they were so curious about it. And it was almost like there was no compassion there at all. Like there was no empathy there yet. It was just all curiosity. They're just noticing, wow, look at this thing I found. Isn't it interesting? And as adults, like that is one of the first and most important things that we can do for children at that point, is to meet them where they are in that curiosity, and try to put aside any feelings of disgust or I don't know. I think with a lot of us as adults, we just feel this sense of uncomfortableness. We know so much more about death. We're closer, maybe to the end of our lives. We hopefully closer to the end of our lives than we are our children, most certainly. And we just, it kind of makes us uncomfortable, the whole noticing of death, or the grossness, or the decomposition that can happen. Sometimes it can even smell bad when a creature is decomposing. But for children, often they approach it with wonder. And so if we can hold in our disgust or other emotions that we're feeling, or sadness or grief or whatever, and instead of replying, oh, that's so sad that creature died, instead of rejecting that experience with, ew, put that thing down, don't touch that, and instead we create some kind of inner wonder in our own being, and we can exude that with the child. We can look at their eyes and see the curiosity there, and we can say, wow, tell me about what you found. Well, and then you can guide them, of course, and say, I'm going to keep my hands here and not touch it. I don't want to touch it or disturb it. I'm just going to look. And I think that can be healthy modeling. But if you approach it with just an awareness that you are together noticing this interesting thing together, just like you would notice the pink tower, or you would notice interesting things about spaghetti, or the rest of the world around you. I think that can really give you a great start to having a healthy relationship with the end of life right from the very beginning.
Exactly. I think partly because we're helping the child understand, I think, something very important, which is that the physical form, the things inside of us that you might see, like, here we often see sea mammals washed up on the beach. I mean, and they're very smelly. They can be very big. You see a dead seal or something. Once we saw a dead dolphin.
We did. That was not smelly.
It was not. It just recently
just washed up, and we were both kind of sad because we didn't know what happened to this beautiful, healthy dolphin that had just
it didn't look
up.
mangled. It just had died for some reason.
And did it hit a ship? Did it? I don't know, have a brain aneurysm? Like, who knows what happened to this dolphin? But it was not decomposed. It was beautiful.
It was such a
beautiful.
I mean, you would think, well, that's kind of gruesome, but the fact is, never in my life had I been able to actually study a dolphin. The skin in that way is still not moving, I mean, and the parts were there, and it was fascinating. We weren't the only ones. There were many people,
No.
including like amateur biologists and others, or people who were calling in to report it to the Marine Mammal Center that's here,
Mhm.
so they can be studied, because we want to know like what happened to it to prevent it from happening again. But taking the time to sort of look at that physical form and sort of studying it and satisfying a kind of curiosity about the natural world is a-okay, because we want people to understand that. We also want people to understand that we are more than just the physical being, whatever we want to call that other thing, a soul, consciousness, higher mind. That we have lots of words for it, and there are lots of different ways to believe that. I certainly believe that we are much more than the sum of our parts, that kind of Gestalt theory, and there's something within us. I think the Montessori principles kind of point to that as well. I think they're very clear.
She talks so much about the soul and the
Exactly.
spirit.
Exactly. So I think it's also, in a way to help a child start to understand, like, yes, death is a part of it. Yes, we're made up of these different things. Yes, someday we will die, as all living things will die. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily the end of the story, because
Yeah.
we are much more than just the bones and muscles and flesh. And so I think if we can kind of demystify death at that earlier age when they're little, and not react with um, too much horror, which is kind of common, it can help them sort of build a grounding of that, so that at the point when they do realize, like, that thing was living and it's not going to exist anymore, and they have this
Mhm.
mind-blowing experience when they get to a later stage of development, they can start to kind of build on that idea of, how does the natural body work? Why would this happen?
Yeah, and that when does that happen? It usually happens after the age of 3. So sometime between the ages of 3 and 6, that conscious mind is working, that conscious mind is putting together the dots, and they're recognizing the permanency that comes with death. And it might not happen, as soon as your child turns 3. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But generally parents start to notice it around the end of the 3rd year. So around age 4 or 4.5 or 5, children can often sometimes become quite obsessive or anxious or concerned
Yeah,
about death. That's the time when I remember my own children realizing that someday I would die, and realizing that they would die too, but they were much more concerned about my own death,
that's
the
right.
being abandoned, or the loss of that protective net, that protective net around them might someday just not be there anymore, was frightening. And so as a Montessorian, I didn't want to lie to my children and say, oh no, I'll always be here for you, because that's not true. Because there will be a day, we all will die. There will be a day when I will not physically be here anymore. And so having creating the balance between comfort, like, yes, this is a part of life. Someday I will die, but also you don't need to worry about that right now. Like, I am here now and I love you. And I'm going to live as long as I can.
That's right.
To be here for you, because I want to be here for you. And I hope that you are going to be very, very old when you die, and that I will be very, 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 very old when I die too. And some children struggle with it more than others.
They do.
Yeah.
Especially if they have a certain kind of traumatic experience, something in their personal life, that can kind of leave a scar. And it can be very, very pernicious. It
Or
can,
if they're just a very highly sensitive
that's right.
person.
They might
Yeah.
have a really high level of empathy, or just sensitivity in a way. And so they feel things deeply.
Yeah. So during this particular time, when your child starts to really have that awareness, I feel like it's very, very important for us as educators, as our educators of our children, to share with them to study life cycles just as an educational subject. And that's already built into the Montessori curriculum,
That's right.
in the zoology
Both
curriculum. It's
primary
just
and lower elementary.
for both
Absolutely.
ages. Yeah. It's not something that you stop studying. It's something that is always fascinating. You can always pick another animal and study the life cycle of that animal. The life cycle of a fly is going to be different from the life cycle of a mosquito or a bee. They're
Mhm.
just, um, you just go from creature to creature to creature and study the life cycle, and it's going to be fascinating. And something else that we did during that particular time period with our kids is we would allow them to witness that life cycle in as many ways as we could. So we brought in ladybugs into our home and had a study about
Did we have praying
ladybugs.
mantis or something?
We did praying mantis, a praying mantis egg. And with those kind of living experiences, of course, it's important to do it in an ethical way. You don't want to introduce an animal into your local environment that shouldn't be there. So it's important to do that research first before you start inviting butterflies into your house. But it can be really rewarding to share the birth of a creature and then to talk about how that creature's life will end and to kind of anticipate when it might end. All of this reality that you're sharing with your child, it gives them that a security type of feeling.
It does.
So I think that is a really important thing to talk about when we start talking about how do we talk about grief with our children. How do say somebody beloved to the child dies, how do you even address that kind of grief with a child? Well, it starts back when they're very, very, very little, when they're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and you're sharing life cycles and you're talking about death. And something that you're going to notice your children do a lot is role play death. And they'll do this in many different ways all the way through. We've noticed it all the way up through.
Oh, you were telling me about how
at least
our youngest
the
was
end
just
of the
now
second
doing.
plane, maybe some into the third plane as well. I mean,
every child is different, but my grandmother was 100 years old and she just passed away, which actually is part of the trauma of the experience that her son, my father, passed before she did. And so that also leads to all kinds of questions that you have to deal with, right? Because death is very, very complicated and there's no one way to approach that. And so when his mother, my grandmother, passed, it was less traumatic. As my 11-year-old said to me just the other day, he said it wasn't shocking, but it was shocking when Pops, which is what they call my dad, when he died. Because she's old, they had seen her in her, she was 100 years old and she looked 100 years old.
I remember when we came to visit her when she was about 95.
A spry 95.
She was a spry 95. She was not very spry at 95.
No.
She was already in assisted living, but she was under a lot of care at that point. Yeah,
for sure.
There was a lot of nursing care at that point. And I remember we came into her apartment and the kids wanted to know, how old are you? You're really, really old, right? They were fascinated.
Will you live to be 100? I hope you live to be 100.
Oh,
it's going to be amazing. You could be 100.
You could be 100 years old, they would say. And she looked at them and her eyes got huge. And she said, I don't know that I want to live.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know that I want that.
5 more years is a long time. And she got those.
She was ready to go even back then. But then lived another 5 years and through a pandemic.
Absolutely.
And not of COVID, didn't die of COVID.
No, she just died of old age. And beloved, I loved all my family, but the boys didn't have like a super close relationship with her. We haven't lived near we were originally from Texas. That's where they live. We haven't been there in many years. We haven't lived there in years. So only when we go back and visit. But they knew her. They knew great grandma. And I thought it was interesting. You're just telling me that. So I didn't really think much about how it affected them. And like I said with our youngest, he said, well, I wasn't really surprised. It didn't break my heart in the same way is kind of what he's getting at. But apparently it did make a big impression. You want to tell that story?
It did, yeah. Like the next night, I don't know. I think you were out of the house.
Well, I had to fly home to be with the family.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that was it. So then he and I were just goofing off and hanging out together, and he grabs my phone and he says, I'm going to take pictures of you. And I kind of roll my eyes. I'm like, fine, take my picture and then give me my phone back. Let me put it away. And so he grabs my phone and he says, please, I got to take your picture. And then, so I'm just kind of lounging on the couch and he says, I need you to lay like this. And he puts me prone, just so that I'm laying with my feet flat out. And then he takes my hands and he crosses them, just like this. He says, put this hand here and this hand here. And by the time he does that, I'm kind of having an idea of like what's going on here. I'm like, this is making me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm just going to see where this goes. And then he just takes my picture in different positions. Then he gives me these different directions. Close your eyes. Okay, now stick out your tongue. It's kind of silly. But also he was real serious about taking the photos. And he took many photos of me, very flattering photos, I also have to say, in this death position, as though I were in some kind of coffin. And afterwards, um, I don't know that we talked about it a whole lot. I think I just kind of let it go at that point. And then we came back and revisited talking about great grandma and the memorial that was going to happen later on. But in my mind, I guess I was kind of in a way channeling my inner Maria, and just like observing the experience while I was in the moment with him. I just thought, wow, how interesting that he's still role playing
He's
death, or
trying
that
to
he
process
needed to
through this. Yeah.
process, and this is the way that he's processing. And so little children will do this too. You may notice your child who has a first awareness of death start to pretend to be dead. Our children love to do this. They would be riding their scooters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we would be following them behind because they're faster on a scooter. And so we would be walking behind them. They would be scooting ahead. And then all of a sudden, they would not be seen up ahead. And David and I would kind of freak out a little bit. We'd be like, oh no, do you see the kids anymore? Where did they go? Did they zoom off somewhere? And then we would kind of walk faster until we caught up with them. And there they would both be on the side of the road. I mean, not like in the road, but like in the the grassy area, on the side of the sidewalk, right? And they'd have their tongues sticking out, and they'd as though they had died. And they wouldn't wake up. We would come over and we would say, hey, what are you guys doing? Go. Okay, let's keep walking. But they would just stay frozen in that dead position. And eventually they would open their eyes fast and say, ha ha, we're not really dead. You thought we were dead. And we would play along and say, oh, we thought you were
What a terrible thing to do to us.
We thought you were dead.
We were so worried.
But they played this game over and over and over and over and over and over and over until the point where David and I were so sick of this game, but we knew that they still loved it. And so we would always play the pretend with them.
Yeah, to a point. I mean, at some point, like, just keep going.
I know, just
keep going.
I see you're not dead.
Right. I got it. He's dead.
I know, because they would do it like every few
20 feet or something. Yeah. You're like, oh no. Yeah, no, that's right. And they did that again for years. And there wasn't really any event around it. It was no one had passed. It was several years ago when they were younger. It was just a developmental stage. Yeah. And it's, they're in different stages. The one is 3 years older than the other. So they are far enough apart that they're often not in rhythm, but it's amazing. This goes to the point of like the spiraling and everything else. Like the parallelism you still see despite them being at different stages of development or readiness, and the way that they play together. Again, going back also to the point of having that socialization, so that, and even if it's with older or younger kids, just giving them that exposure so that they can kind of play through some of these things and learn.
Yeah. So sometime in the elementary years, you're going to start to also see the moral age of the child arise in terms of discussing death. So they will start asking more ethical questions about death. So whereas the 4-year-old will just accept, my dog died, it was sad, and they may or may not have a conversation about the euthanasia piece. I haven't asked my brother or anything. You might just kind of let that part go and focus on just the fact that the dog is now dead, and make that be the point. There's no real point in going into the ethics of it at the primary age. But by the time your child is elementary, that euthanasia piece is going to be very important to them. It's going to be the thing that they're interested in talking about or discussing, is the ethics of life. And we actually had that conversation with our kids, with your great grandma, several times, as she would get sicker and then medical interventions would revive her health again. We would talk to the kids a lot about how medical technology has improved so much. And we would talk about get into the ethics of that conversation. At what point is it okay to keep extending someone's life, and at what point should you just let them go? I
How
don't,
much choice should the person have
yeah,
over
how much
that?
choice should the person have? We also had to have that conversation when your dad died
That's
as
right.
well, because ultimately
Yeah,
you had to make that
exactly.
decision.
That's right.
Yeah.
So these are very hard. Now, a child is not going to make these decisions, but the child is learning the questions to ask. They're building within their minds the roadmap that's going to dictate how they navigate those things later in life when they do have to confront them. I mean, that's the essence of what this learning period is all about. We're trying to lay out the universe to them so that they can build upon it. And for a second plane child, you know they are in the moral age to the max, right? And I think that's probably because they're making that the transition to abstract thought, right? So in the first plane, it's very concrete, and then at the end of the first plane and into the second plane, they start to make that leap. They start to think abstractly. They start to ask, and abstract thought then leads to ambiguity.
Yeah.
How do you know what is right or like? I know this is made out of a certain material, and I can prove that it's dull, but then I start to think more abstractly, like, well, how was it made? Oh, what is this made out of? Your child gets older. Is this made in a way that was good or bad? Should
Right.
we buy this kind of thing? It's not. You start to have conversations around: is it ethical to eat meat?
Right.
Is it ethical to do this or that? We had a pet once that we had to euthanize before the boys were born, but they see pictures and they ask, "Oh, where's Kitty?" And we'll say, "Well, this had to happen." And over and over and over again, through over the course of years, they would be asked, "What happened to that cat? Why did that happen?"
Yeah.
Because they want to know, because they're trying to decide right and wrong. They're
Right.
trying to straighten, they're trying to figure out concrete things for things that are inherently abstract.
Yeah, so parents often will ask in our community, we just had a death in the family or a pet just died. How do I teach this, in a Montessori way? How do I deal with it? What do I do? But the answer is so much bigger than that. I hope you're seeing that through this conversation. It's really not so much about what lesson do I give or how do I help my child, understand and be happy again. It's more about a long term approach to illuminating all of these different concepts that come along with the end of life. And you just have to start when they're very little and keep building it up. So as they're in elementary, they have passed the point where they just understand that death is a thing and you're either alive or you're not alive. And they're really getting into morality. And this also, as they transition towards the third plane, which is like 12 to 18, they may even start to become more interested in religious
Oh yeah, for
aspects as
sure.
well. And this kind of starts, we've noticed that teach religion at any age, of course, but we've noticed that the more abstract the idea is, the older the child needs to be able to really dig in there. And so as your child is approaching the second half of the second plane, you might see more interest in talking about the details of the soul and the spirit and what is that and does it exist and what really does happen concretely when you die and what does happen religiously when you die. And of course, everyone's religion or personal belief system is going to affect how they teach those concepts to their children.
That's right.
And those are also things that you start teaching in a very concrete way when they're little, belief systems. And then you get into the ethical conversation as in regards to religion and the soul and what happens. And then as they get into the third plane, they're starting to make decisions on their own about what they believe in, and it may or may not be the same thing that you believe in yourself or that you have really taught them. And so that's
That's right.
that's something that is a natural progression. As the child is needing security in the beginning, they need moral, a moral focus and discussions, and as the complexity develops during the second plane and the third plane, they really need to be in a place where they're able to say, you know what, I believe this about death, and this is how I handle death, and I think this this is what happened to grandma,
That's right.
so
And they're going to change their mind a bunch,
yep.
and they're going to vacillate, and sometimes they're going to say things that they meant just to please you because they're like, oh, this is what we believe. And then sometimes it'll be the opposite. And they're like, I'm rebelling against it.
Right.
But that's why, whether or not you have a teenager out there, it doesn't matter. You probably have a child if you're watching this. And even if they're very little, you're laying out the building blocks now.
Exactly.
Even at 2, you're trying, the ultimate goal for us is to build happy, successful humans. And that building starts at day 1, like it pre-day 1, right? It's from the birth through the development of the child, all the way up. We're just trying to give them more and more opportunity to learn and to struggle with things that are important. When they're very little, struggling with things that are important is about, let's say, identifying the concrete reality of something. And when they're in the second plane, it's about starting to explore abstract thought. And when they're in the third plane, it's about, what do I believe?
Mm-hmm.
And so you find that's when you find kids get really into politics or religion. They get really, really invested in society because they
become vegetarians, or
right,
they like,
exactly.
They do something that might be different and that's
exactly.
very personal.
When I was a teen, I became really, really spiritual. I became really religious, because that was like, you want to believe, like you become, it comes within you. That's just part of that development of childhood.
Yeah.
And the thing that influenced that was all the things that have been laid beforehand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sabina.
You're welcome, Sabina.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I would like to leave, because we got to go, is I would like to leave you with the encouragement to share your own grief with your children. Because I think as parents, sometimes we feel like we have to hide a lot of how we feel,
Totally.
and especially when it comes to sadness. But what we are doing when we have that moment of respect and reverence and sadness for the dolphin at the beach, and the attitude at the beach when a marine mammal washes up is always it's curious. People are curious, but it's also somber.
Yeah.
There's people will bring flowers, and so we tend to go if the animal is fresh, maybe even laying a hand on them to feel and to just, be gentle and to treat that animal with respect.
It is a part of our creation.
Yeah. And if it's not an animal that you can touch, it's dead bugs, children often touch, but like if it's not an animal that's safe to touch, you can model putting your hands behind your back and just kneeling down, and maybe saying some special words that are kind of resonant of how you are feeling inside. And so what I would do is, when we discovered that dead bird, we would kneel down together, we would put our hands in our lap, and I would kind of give a little prayer over the animal. Essentially, I would say something like, "This sweet little bird, I hope it had a good life. I know that what's going to happen next is it will decompose into the ground and it will nourish the earth. And I am imagining what it was like when it was alive, its wings spreading and it tweeting out of happiness and flying in the trees. And I'm just so grateful to be here at the end of its life." And we modeled this kind of thing with our children all the time when we encountered things. And so it's the same when so if you do this, if you kind of practice this reverence, this compassion, this love, this curiosity with your children, when you do encounter a traumatic experience in your family, when the dog does die, or when your grandma dies, you're going to already be in a better place with your kids. You know what your family does to handle death. You're going to treat grandma in a sense the same kind of way you treated that little bird at the park, except on a grander scale. Maybe you'll say some words about grandma. Maybe you'll talk about the memorial that you're going to go to and what's going to happen there and why it's important.
How we behave, or how we can, exactly.
Yeah.
What we would say,
what we would say.
What do we say if someone says something to us? How do we respond? We're practicing for all those moments. building the paths.
Yeah. And when David's dad died, it really was traumatic, for the kids and for him and for me and just for the whole family. None of us were ready to let him go.
No.
And we did have a funeral, a burial. He was cremated, and we talked to the kids about cremation. And that was a really hard conversation too. And again, our youngest is in the second plane. And so the idea of burning was really horrifying to him. And we had to talk about it a lot and do research about it. But what Montessori does for us as parents is it helps us understand that the spiritual nature of the child is just as important as introducing that reality to the child, that they both have
Absolutely.
to come, and that they can be taught at the same time. We both can have reality and we can have spirituality at the same time, and teach our children just how to love more deeply, how to be more open-minded, how to be curious, how to respect other cultural traditions. So we talked a lot about other cultures, and who might choose to bury versus who might choose to cremate, and just the different decisions different cultures make. We talked a lot. We've always kind of, in a ways, mildly celebrated the Dia de los Muertos with our kids. We always acknowledge it every year. There are just so many opportunities that you have, because really death, the celebration of death, the grieving of death, it is one of the most important ways that we can show our humanity. Now, it's not true that humans are the only animals out there that grieve. There are other animals out there that grieve the death of
Absolutely.
their own other creatures. But it is very
my
important.
father's dog, he obviously
Yeah,
did.
obviously. But and I was thinking of elephants specifically.
Yeah,
I think
no,
there's
right.
research on that elephants definitely grieve their dead. Even if they can't bury them, there's something about the bereavement with them. So we're not the only ones who have that, but it is a very significant part of being human, and it's nothing to shy away from. We want to lean in to the conversations of death and not away from them. We don't want to avoid it as a subject. We want to walk towards it.
That's right. Well, it's a heavy topic, but it's good to
is.
talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, the open conversation is so critical, and I would just keep thinking, the questions that the 9, 10, 11-year-old is asking us are exactly the questions that you as an adult may think about.
Yeah.
And there's a last very quick story. I'll say, when we watched Encanto, you go back and watch that episode 2 weeks ago. Our youngest, one of the characters can talk to animals. I think it's Antonio.
Yeah.
And and our youngest was like, there's a dinner scene. Like, is he eating meat?
Mm-hmm.
Is he eating, are they all eating meat?
I remember
Wait
that.
a minute. He knows like
wait.
these animals are conscious and like are friends to him. Like, can he eat them now? Can he watch other people eat them? And like, those are really good questions. You just have to kind of go with it because that's the story. But
Yep.
absolutely right. Like, that's a really hard philosophical question that you would struggle with at any age.
Yeah.
And that it comes out of the mouth of an 11-year-old shouldn't surprise us. And we should be willing and ready to try and have that conversation.
Yeah. All right, we are going to wrap up here, friends. So thanks for sharing this time with us.
Thank you.
As always, you can contact us at hello@Child of the Redwoods. That will reach both of us.
Yep.
And we will be here in another couple weeks.
2 weeks on Thursday again. I think we're going to be doing Child is the Teacher
hopefully
Part
David
1.
will be done by then, and we can talk about Child is the Teacher.
Yeah. So everybody have a great holiday weekend if wherever you are, or
if you
just
celebrate.
a great if you celebrate, or just a great weekend if you don't. So
all right, take care. Mwah. Love you all.